All right, welcome back to Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about some of the measures Columbia Public Schools is taking to try to address overcrowding in schools. We're also talking about the achievement gap in Columbia, as well as a number of other issues. Joining us in studio today, Chris Belcher is the superintendent of Columbia Public Schools. Christine King is the president of the Columbia Board of Education, and Jonathan Sessions is a member of the board. And for you in our audience, what should be done to reduce the achievement gap in Columbia? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia, or you could join our online chat. You can also feel free to ask any other questions or on topics you'd like to hear our guests from Columbia Public Schools discuss today. And why don't we talk about that? We haven't talked explicitly about the achievement gap much today, and I think that's an issue we can talk about forever, every show we have you guys on. But regardless, what are some of the issues we're thinking about right now? One thing to start with, Superintendent Belcher, the Avid program was a new program this year. Tell us a little bit about how that's been going.
Well, we've been researching this for quite a while. As you know, the achievement gap is a daunting issue because it involves so much social policy. It's centered around resources for children, the demographics in which some schools have versus other schools, and really to impact the achievement gap is certainly a community-wide focus. We'd taken some initial steps early in my tenure here by trying to make Title I preschool available for all. There is a waiting list, and we know that preschool and early childhood development is essential. So the board, even in a time of recession, allocated more district funds to support that program so that no child would have to be on a waiting list to receive services to get them ready for kindergarten. That was an investment of about $1.5 million. We're doing intervention things and those kind of things. But at the secondary level, the reorganization is building in time for intervention and hopefully going to be a more productive schedule for kids. But we've added two programs that are really making a difference, and one is Avid. It is the most tested program in the nation. We've researched it. We did site visits where it targets kids that look to be college bound or career bound and have a certain profile, but they need to have support in order to get there. And we're doing that, and the program has been very successful the first year, and we want to grow it. But we also want to launch some of the initiatives that are within that program across all domains in the school, and I probably not time here to explain that.
Sure.
It's a big investment, but at the same point, this is such a onerous problem. If you don't invest and commit to doing certain things, you're not going to see much of a move in the needle. We've also done some things with increasing our enrollment into honors and advanced placement courses, because we know that we need to challenge kids to push their rigor and give them support. And so we are having some successes. However, you don't see the needle moving as much as we like. Some of that's statistical. Since I've been here, we've gone from about 37 to 38% of the kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch to about 45% this year. We've gone from 500 students that was English as a second language learners to 1,100 this year, and many of them coming from refugee environments. We're diversifying as a community. We're urbanizing, and we're doing a lot of things in response, but the needle is a moving target for us because of those kind of issues. We're also doing a full-scale assault with the community, trying to work with United Way and some of the other social agencies in town to provide wraparound services. So I would love to do a full show and talk about the initiatives we're doing, but I don't have time.
Sure. Well, the thing you just mentioned, I think, is that the cradle to career idea?
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk a little about that, because that's kind of an interesting idea that's just maybe somewhat new. Yeah.
That came from our World Cafes, where we were talking about the achievement gap, and we talked and looked at all sides of the problems and looked at the research, and we found a couple of communities that were doing something that we thought, why not replicate it? And it was called the Strive model out of Cincinnati, to where the United Way and other businesses and social agencies agree to set common community standards of student achievement and to encourage all to buy into those standards and to be able to report back to their funding agency how they were addressing those standards. It's a little more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
But this community then picked it up. So the United Way, the YC Squared, which is a city-county group, a lot of the social service agencies in town are signing on board. And we have unified goals. For example, all kids should be prepared and ready to learn in kindergarten. All kids should be reading on or above grade level by the end of third grade. All kids should have successful entry and exit from middle school. Those are what we wanted to start with.
Those are the benchmarks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, how do we make everyone responsible for that? The school can provide some of the data, but how is Fun City supporting that? How is United Way supporting that? How are the local preschools supporting that? It's voluntary. We can't force them to do anything. But for example, if we're doing a certain reading program at our school district for preschool, shouldn't the other preschools in the community have the opportunity to use that same program to standardize the delivery? If we're providing certain resources, shouldn't they have some access to that? Shouldn't those other agencies be able to say, listen, the kids that are involved in my program have a higher attendance rate in middle school than those that aren't? So it's an audacious goal. It is really complicated, and you can't explain it in the short time we have here. But student achievement, especially of our lower income population who tend to be less mobile in society, is an absolute essential element of economic development and community vitality in Columbia. And we're trying to convince the businesses and industry that you have as much at stake at this as the schools do. And if we don't close this gap, you're going to have trouble finding workers. We're going to have more people on dependency, and ultimately it degrades the quality of life in Columbia. So it's trying to expand the horizon and the discussion about who's responsible for what, and to say, let's not have blame and shame. Let's just get this done.
Yeah. Well, and a little bit I've read about this too. It sounds like, I mean, all these agencies already have a vested interest and want to help these people, but it sounds like it's just more organization and maybe information sharing.
It's
right?
integration and alignment. It really is trying to integrate and align towards a common goal.
And then sometimes I think community members say, okay, well, that sounds really good, but how are you really putting it out there?
Yeah,
and
how you gonna do it?
I serve on the education advisory group for United Way that read all the RFPs for groups that send in requests for money from an education standpoint. And they hold true to the 3 education standards set by Cradle to Career, which is kindergarten readiness, read on grade level by the end of grade 3, and then the transition in and out of middle school. So when groups or individuals wrote in and asked for funding to United Way, from an education standpoint, if it didn't meet one or all of those objectives, then the group said it doesn't qualify. Whereas before, when the United Way gave money out, I don't think there was a unified, impactful approach. And now that's their community impact. They want to make an impact. And so I think that's the part about it that I think has been great, because you actually see it working in the community. We may not see the needle move yet, but you do see it working. And I was glad that after our World Cafes in 2010 that it became bigger than Columbia Public Schools.
But it sounds like this is not a tomorrow solution. This is something that's going to
No,
take some
it's
time.
ongoing.
It's going to take some, but it's also going to take some time to build. If this cradle to career
Correct.
thing is to happen, it's going to take.
Yes.
How long do we think that time frame is? Probably years. I would
It's
guess,
going
right?
to continue.
I don't think that we'll ever.
We're never going to be finished.
Yeah, and
Sure.
you know, and I don't. At the risk of sounding someone calling in with a question that might be, I don't think we will ever reduce or do away with an achievement gap. I think what we want to do is make sure that all kids come to school ready to learn in kindergarten. They're on or above grade level reading by the time they reach grade 3 or finish grade 3, and then the middle school transition. If we do that, we will always have students that are high achievers that create a gap. We also want to eliminate that summertime loss that we see in kids that come from poverty. So if we can get those students that are achieving in the lower spectrum up, that to me is the goal, because you're always going to have a difference in how kids learn, and what they learn and how they like school and all that. But we just really need to get those students, and most of those students do come from our free and reduced lunch homes and our kids who come from poverty. So that's the challenge.
Another thing, this is even more early stage than what we're talking about now, but I thought, Jonathan, I know you've been slightly involved, and you mentioned mobility earlier. I know there's this idea of a community school. I want to say right up front, it's a very early stage idea.
Absolutely,
Don't expect this to happen tomorrow either, but maybe tell us a little bit about this idea. Peter Stiepelman, unfortunately, wasn't able to join us today to talk about it.
This is something we've talked about for a while, and there are models out there that we're looking at. And of course, anything that we do, is going to be in line with the cradle to career. It's going to be something for Columbia because we have needs that are different than other places. But there's a place called the Harlem Children's Zone in New York City run by a gentleman named Jeffrey Canada, and he's been to Columbia and spoken a couple times. Dr. Belcher mentioned that mobility is something we see. I think you actually misspoke. We see a lot of mobility often with
But I was talking about mobility out of Columbia.
out of
Once they
Columbia.
See a lot of
graduate,
internal
yeah.
mobility, but
Right.
we,
That- and
we
that's
know
the
that kids
challenge.
that are of lower resources tend to stay in the region,
Okay.
where kids
Right.
that come from more affluent families will often take jobs in different states and cities because they go through an education process and have the ability to move.
And within our region, though, we see those students have high mobility within our region. They will be. I met a young man the other day that had been through 6 elementary schools in the 4 years he had been in our Columbia Public Schools. He gets bounced around, and it has a lot to do with poverty. Our goal, and we have a couple schools that already operate in this model, but our goal would be to have a school that provides a stable place. If a student should, it wouldn't necessarily be district based. If a student should move within Columbia, we would still provide transportation back to that school. Something we envisioned with wraparound services. It might start extra early and continue all the way through late into the evening to provide families that might have multiple jobs. Knowing the opportunity to know they have a safe place for their children. Again, this is a very early stages, so there's nothing definitive, and it will continue to adapt as we start to look at how this program might be designed. But it would involve bringing in those other community programs, those other community agencies, and provide the resources that our families might need. It'd be a magnet school in concept. Any student could attend there, but very much like Head Start, we would want to provide an opportunity for students that have more of a need.
Yeah, and again, practically there'll be a lot of things to talk about before that would happen because we're talking. It is almost one of those island situations we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's the horizon's 2018 or 2019,
Absolutely, yeah.
and the community I think is getting used to the idea that we're pretty transparent about open discussions and brainstorming, and people do get excited and think, well, when is this going to happen? Well, this one has got a little bit of press because it's unique, but it's just normal process of having really significant conversations about are there opportunities. This all came about because as we started talking about building a school on the east side of town with this 2014 bond issue, that may free up a little building space where Cedar Ridge is currently. And if that's the case, do we want to move something into that? Would that free up Field Elementary School? And then someone said, well, that'd be a great place for. And then the conversation just kept going. So it's silly. It was simply nudged forward because of a facilities possibility.
Sure.
And so it's gotten some good discussion, some good press. We'll continue to discuss it, but we're probably 18 months away from
it'd be
putting something in front of the board.
Because it'd be a significant change from anything we're doing right now.
Absolutely.
Right.
You have to have a lot of planning and development before we ever get to a place where it would be coming before the board.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a moment to remind our audience that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about some of the measures Columbia Public Schools is taking to try to address overcrowding in schools. We're also talking about the achievement gap in Columbia, as well as a number of other issues. Joining us in studio today, Chris Belcher is the superintendent of Columbia Public Schools. Christine King is the president of the Columbia Board of Education, and Jonathan Sessions is a member of the board. For you and our audience, while we have all of these guests here, what topics would you like to hear them discuss today? Let us know by giving us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. And yes, since we do have the brain trust here today, there's another thing we can always talk about, but it's still pertinent, is state funding to Columbia Public Schools and to school districts across the state. How has state funding fared in the past recent years, and what are we expecting coming forward too?
Continues to decline, and the foundation formula continues to be underfunded. Now, this year, more so than any year in the past, we've gotten a promise from the governor that he's going to request that the budget fully fund the foundation formula, which would be the
Be about
first
$12
time.
million
Yeah.
once it's totally funded. The governor said that before he leaves office, he wants to fully fund the foundation formula. I don't know if I brought the bad luck with me, but when I came here, every year after that, we've had less and less money in state dollars. And most of it's come through the foundation formula. But at the beginning, before they cut the foundation formula, they cut about 60% of our transportation, which is called categorical funding. Parents as teachers was cut. All these programs that are funded outside of the foundation formula were radically cut. We're 12 million short from where we were promised to be. And so we've had to reduce, my first 3 years here, we reduced 250 staff members, $18 million of programs and staffing. And then we passed the levy 2 years ago, and we're starting to add some staffing back to maintain decent class size and those kind of things. But for the first time, I do have a little optimism. The state budget's up a little bit. And politically, because of re-elections and those kind of things, I think there is an onus to try to start getting increased funding back to schools, and I think colleges and universities as well are starting to get some press. How they're going to do it, I don't know, because there's still not a lot of money. It's just a little bit extra. They're having discussions about tax credits and those kind of things. But I will say that when the foundation formula is not funded, it doesn't distribute money in an equitable manner. And Columbia is on the loser end of that deal because the formula is just unique. And because we're a growing large district, we almost get punished for it. So if that foundation formula ever gets back up to being fully funded where that equity wheel turns, we benefit better than most because we've been being punished over the last 4 years. And it would literally give us millions of dollars a year that we could start dealing with issues that we've just sort of had to put at arm's length until we get there. And we're excited that that might be a possibility, but the state legislature hasn't even met yet, and there's still a lot of dialogue going on back and forth about tax breaks and tax cuts, which if those happen, once again, that takes out the revenue stream.
Sure. And so I guess also too, has EPS really considered many other ways to finance?
There is no other way
There is
allowed
no
by law.
other than,
Right.
The other option is to turn to our local tax base, and as the state makes cuts to our budget, our only other source of income is to turn to the voters here in Columbia.
But we have not had
And
that
we have not
discussion
had
yet.
that discussion.
Sure.
So,
Someone
yes.
needs to call. That's not. Yeah. I just
we
wanna make sure.
passed.
No, sure,
we
but that's the
passed
only
levy,
option
but
you
that's
have.
that's the
Yeah.
only option as
Yeah.
a school district that we have is
Right.
the option of levying, and that's what you see in
Right.
many school districts as the state has decreased funding. School districts in communities that support public education are more successful because they've been able to turn to their community and say, and ask, will you help us?
And I do think that the first year or two, well, the first year right when you got here, when Dr. Ritter was still interim superintendent, and then maybe the next year, a lot of the reductions we made probably had more to do with other issues, not just the lack of funding from the state level. And I think Dr. Belcher and our board have done a great job in planning and budgeting for the future, knowing battle was opening. And that is another, I think, a key component to some of the reasons, not to blame it on battle, but we knew we wanted to build our fund balances so that when we opened battle, we could operate battle. And so in order to do that, we also had to make, so it's a combination, I think, of a lot of things. I agree, you brought some bad luck when you came here. But, and it hasn't been fun. And I also think because we're a growing community and a thriving community, and to some degree, pockets of Columbia were somewhat insulated from the recession. We spend money, and so we get money from our local tax base, whereas other smaller, more rural type communities don't have that as much. They have to rely on the state. So because we get 65% local and 35% from the state.
Roughly,
Yeah.
And I would add that there's sort of a smoke and mirrors game here, I believe. You have many state legislators who are getting elected on their issue that they're not going to raise taxes, although they won't touch tax credits, which often can be said to be unable to verify that they're being beneficial. But by them saying they're not raising taxes, as Jonathan pointed out, they're simply throwing that on local communities. So progressive communities like Columbia in 2012 understood that we'd lost $12 million from state revenues, and they voted to replace $8 million of it back through a tax increase. And we said, but then we can hope that things get better, and maybe we'll come back up to even. There are many school districts that will never get that vote from their patrons. And so once again, the state of Missouri is abdicating its responsibility to provide a fair and equitable education for all students. And so the kids in Columbia are being taken care of. But if you happen to be the poor child that's born in one of the out-of-state counties that has no tax base and won't take anything in front of their voters, or it gets voted down, just because of the position of their birth or the location, the quality of their education is determined by that. And that just really is hard for me to digest as a citizen of one of the most wealthiest nations in the world, that we would have such disparity in our own state, not even compared to our nation. So by taking a strong state policy stance is one thing, but really what you're doing is creating inequity across the board. And that is not good for the state of Missouri in general. We have in the state of Missouri right now, 49.9% of all students in public education qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Well, and I was gonna say, I know we've had the CEO of Missouri Department of Transportation, or CFO rather, was here, and she was saying, because of this lower tax base, you've got she feels like she's having to compete, or like you're against education. You guys are both fighting for the same funds, for the same limited funds, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that many of our state educational issues are social policy and legislative responsibilities that have not been taken care of. We are a low-tax state, that is absolutely true, but some of the highest academic performance in the nation come in high-tax states. Well, they also have the highest high-tech industry and those kind of issues. We have to be real with our patrons to say that low tax doesn't always mean better economic growth. But that's a public policy debate, and we influence it through our discussions at the local board.
Sure.
But they give us no other tools besides raising property tax to deal with our issues. And then they tend to create models that exempt many people from paying property tax, which becomes somewhat difficult for us. But when you're the city government, you have property tax, you have sales tax, you have usage tax, you have penalties and fines and costs that you can pass on the consumer through utilities. We have none of that. We really are at the discretion of our taxpayers in the state. And I think we've got our taxpayers about as high as we can possibly go without sort of stressing them out. So it's a fine balance.
We actually have a question from our chat room from Martha. She was asking, what's being done to make parents more accountable for their children's education?
It's awfully hard to legislate responsibility, Martha.
I think in our schools, and as a parent, I have a 9th and a 6th grader, and like what John said, we don't want to dictate how a parent raises their child, because children come to us from many different backgrounds, different households, different who raises them and everything. And I think what we need to do as a school district, and I think we're starting to do this better and better each year, is more communication is never bad. And I know I get tons of communication from my kids' teachers and schools. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming, but we want to make sure that we communicate in the right way with our families, and maybe the way to communicate with me is different than maybe to communicate with someone like Martha. I mean, I don't know. And so I think our schools need to do that. I think by going to our secondary model, that is helping that education piece. I know in all the newsletters there is information about, techniques and helpful hints about middle school kids. It can be a challenge to raise. But the bottom line is, I've never heard one of our school administrators criticize, show disrespect for anything that our parents do, because our parents come from all different backgrounds. And so it is not up to us to judge on how a parent does or doesn't parent their child. So although I feel Martha's pain, because there are times when, as a parent myself, I might want to say to another person's child, why don't you say this or this? But you don't know what goes on in that house. And so our role, I think, as public education is to support and be there for the child and the family, and provide different avenues to make sure those parents are engaged and supportive of their child's education, is my personal opinion.
I agree very much. It's children come from all different backgrounds, and as a school district, we can't look at the background of that student and the way that they might best learn or the struggles that they have, and judge them or make a decision about their education based on those backgrounds. We can't. I don't feel it's not right to hold just where some child might be born against that child. We need to make sure that every student has the opportunity to succeed, and it may take a little more for one child than it does, but as a school district, we need to be able to provide those resources and that opportunity.
Okay. Well, just a few minutes left in the show. I'll just cycle back to one of the things we started with on the show very quickly, since we have a couple minutes, we talked about all the growth that's going on, and we just expect that to continue, right? So what's going to, we've been going through this small Mill Creek redistrict drawing. What are we going to see with districts being redrawn in the future? What's the plan there?
This afternoon, as a matter of fact, we have a policy committee meeting, and we'll be looking at something that I recommended a couple times. We need, as a growing community, to more regularly look at our boundaries. Part of the struggle that we're facing at Mill Creek is a long time ago, a boundary was drawn around a bunch of cow pastures. And those cow pastures are now houses, and they haven't been changed those boundaries haven't been changed for a period of time, and it's became a struggle for us to manage. As a growing district and a growing community, we need to continue to look at these boundaries, especially at the elementary level, because those are our smaller schools. So maintaining steady sizes is much more of a struggle. So the policies we're going to look at this afternoon are going to look at a cyclical boundary review. Every so many years, we'd come back, we'd look at the entire map, and we'd say, here are the schools that are increasing before they get to a place like Mill Creek is currently, but hopefully resolve growth issues before they become problems.
And obviously the meeting's yet to happen, but you're thinking likely more often than we've been doing that.
Well,
we really haven't been doing it.
We haven't been doing it at all, and
right.
we've only been doing it when boundaries change, and we've been looking at when new schools are built, and we've been looking at very small pockets, because we'll be looking at the boundaries directly around a building. We have 3 new buildings that will be coming online, within the next 5 years. 3 new elementary schools coming online within the next 5 years. So we'll be looking at it on a more regular basis. But at the same time that we're looking at the pockets around the buildings, the areas around the buildings we're creating, we need to be looking at the bigger map at the same time to make sure that we're not ignoring a situation that might be coming, that might be creeping up on us.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to end it for today. We're out of time. So thank you very much for listening to today's Intersection. Thanks to our guests, Columbia Public Schools Superintendent Chris Belcher, Christine King, the President of the Columbia Board of Education, and Jonathan Sessions, a member of the board. We'd like to remind those of you enjoying this as a rebroadcast that Intersection takes place live for a full hour from 2 to 3 every Monday afternoon. You can watch live streaming video of our program each Monday afternoon online at kbia.org. And alongside that video, you can submit your questions and comments and take part in an online discussion with others in the audience. You'll also find an archive of all of our past programs, including the full hour of today's conversation. Intersections are broadcast from the Reynolds Journalism Institute and is a project of RJI and KBIA. Intersections produced by Raymond Tungakar, Janet Saidi, and Ruben Stern. Travis McMillan is our technical director, with production assistance from Caleb Hoke, Casey Morrell, and Andrew Yost. Pat Akers is our audio producer. Executive directors are Mike Dunn and Mike McKean, and I'm Ryan Famuliner. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great week.